friends, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, Sunset Bow Tarot. And today I wanted to do a response to a really fun tag. I originally saw this on Peekaboo Rose's channel, Julie from Peekaboo Rose, but I understand that this is originally a tag that was started by a French language channel, which is Journal d'une femme moderne et spirituelle Steph. I can't pronounce French, but that's what I think it's called. I'll put a link down below. But basically the idea of this tag is that there's a couple of different categories, and the question is, do you have a deck that fits in those categories? So this seemed like really fun, and I thought I'd play along. So here we go. The first question is, do I have a two-colored deck? And the answer to that is yes, I have quite a few two-colored decks actually. I do like black and white decks in a lot of ways, and so I have several. So the first black and white deck I ever got was the Little Monsters Tarot, and this is by Efflorescent Tarot on Etsy. I love this deck. It's so adorable and cute and weird and funny, and I really love this one. And I have the little poker-sized edition. I think she sells this as a bigger deck now, but I have the little one and I really like it this small. So that is one of them. That is an all black and white deck, the Little Monsters Tarot. By the same artist, I also have a black and white version of her Efflorescent Tarot. So here is that deck. Again, these are the backs. And this is another really wonderful black and white deck. I love her artwork. It's very intricate drawings, and it works really beautifully as a black and white deck. There's also a color version of this deck. I actually have both because I really love this deck, but the black and white version is super cool. I don't think I'm actually supposed to show more than one deck for each of these categories, but I'm going to because people like looking at decks and it's fun. So another black and white deck that I have is the Victorian Tarot. This is by Tarocco Studio. I keep it in this mustache peggy bag, which I still think is freaking hilarious. I absolutely love this deck. These are the backs. And this is just a really cool deck. It is all Victorian engraving style, so it's completely black and white. It's, again, very intricate artwork. I love this Wheel of Fortune. It's nice cardstock, and it's, generally speaking, just a really beautiful deck. And I need to use this one again. I haven't used it in like several months, and I need to like get it back out again because it's a really cool deck. And the artwork of it is really fantastic. And the thing that I like about this is that it is engraving style, but they did edit in the suit symbols where they could. So here's an example, like the 10 of Swords. You can see that somebody photoshopped in those swords. Like originally that person did not have 10 swords sticking in them, but it's kind of nice that they did that actually, because it, you know, I don't know, it takes that same engraving style and then it makes it really Rider-Waite-Smith inspired. So it's a lot of fun. Really like that deck. That is, again, the Victorian Tarot by Tarocco Studio in the mustache bag. So another black and white deck that again, a deck that I should use more than I do, I think, and that is the Shadowlight Tarot by Waking Canvas. This deck is so cool. Again, it's all black and white. It has this really intricate art style. I remember the first time I went through this deck, I wasn't sure about how well it would read for me. Oh, and I should show the back. Here are the backs, and it has this cool, like, sparkly silver gilding on the edges. But I wasn't sure how well this deck was going to read for me, because I was worried that it just, like, might be hard to see what was going on in the cards. And I have found that I can read with this deck. But I wish I should reach for it more. It's one of those decks where I've thought about letting it go, and then I've never quite been able to, because I love the artwork of it so much, and I think it's so cool. And, you know, I suppose it's probably fine to have a deck in my collection that I only reach for very occasionally, because I do reach for it on occasion. It's just not super often. So again, that is the Shadowlight Tarot by Waking Canvas. Such a cool deck. And then the last black and white deck that I wanted to show is one that I actually just got super recently, as in like within the last 2 weeks. And this is a total Lisa made me do it from Lisa from Supportive Tarot. This is the Gorgon Tarot. It's a round deck. And like I said, I've only had this deck for a couple weeks, but the readings that I've done with it have rocked my socks. this deck is so cool. It was totally off my radar. This is the first round deck I've ever owned. I have, after a extensive amount of experimentation, figured out how to shuffle this deck. And I've had some just really super incisive readings with it so far. I'm really, really loving this one. This is definitely going to make my favorites for March. It's so cool. Like, it's just an amazing deck. And now that I hear that they are actually coming out with a smaller version, I'm quite excited because it's not that I mind the large version. And again, I have figured out how I can shuffle it and have it shuffle relatively well. It can't really be riffle shuffled, but you know, I have figured out a way to actually make it possible for me to shuffle this thing. But if they do come out with a smaller version, I will definitely get it because, you know, it just might be a little bit easier to handle. And I absolutely am loving this one so far. I totally wasn't sure how I'd feel about it, and it has great imagery. I really like what's in the little guidebook, and I don't know, it's a really good one. I like this deck a lot. And as for being two colored, I debated whether or not I should put that one in this category because it does have two cards with splashes of red on it. So, but I suppose you could define it as like a black and red deck, or I don't know, but close enough. And I wanted to talk about it because I think it's super cool. So anyway, that's the Gorgon's Tarot. So the next category is, do I have a multicultural deck? And I kind of debated a lot about how to include decks in this category, like what is truly multicultural versus like what just has a few token people who aren't white. So this one was kind of a difficult one to know how to define it, but I did eventually land on two decks that I think do a pretty good job of this. And one of those is the This Might Hurt Tarot by Isabella Rotman. I just got this quite recently. Like, I got it right around Christmas, and I haven't worked, whoops, here are the backs. I got the black holographic edging. I haven't worked with it all that much yet, but I'm really excited to work with it. I feel like I need to spend some more time with it and like really get to know it better. I've only like read with it once or twice since I got it, but it is really, really beautiful, and it is really diverse. And, you know, just in terms of thinking about diverse decks, like, I don't know, the term multicultural wasn't quite right. I wanted to think about it in terms of diversity. So not just, you know, ethnic or racial diversity, but body type diversity, age diversity, all those kinds of things. And I think that this deck does a really amazingly beautiful job with that. It has a very modern feel, and I think it does a really good job of reflecting the actual world that we live in. And so, I don't know, this is a really wonderful one. I freaking love this world card so much. This is the card that made me buy this deck. Anyway, it's a really cool, beautiful deck, and I need to spend some more time with it. So I got it at a time that was just, it was literally like a week or two before Christmas, and it was just really busy. And since then, I haven't actually gotten the chance to like really spend time with it, and I really need to. I need to like spend some time with that deck. So, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So another deck that I think of as being quite diverse, and this is a deck that I read with a lot, and I especially use this deck a lot for client readings, is the Textured Tarot. This is by McLoughlin. This is one of my absolute favorite reading decks, and I do think that this deck has a lot of diversity in it. And again, it's like you can see here, I mean, it's diversity in terms of age, racial diversity, gender diversity. This deck portrays disability in more than one card, which is like, you don't see a ton of decks that actually do that, which I think is really cool and special. And I really, really love this one. This is just one of my absolute top readers. It is such a good deck. It's beautiful, and it really has so many layers and so many messages and so many meanings in every card that it really can just speak to any situation. And so I reach for this one all the time, just super constantly. It's one of my absolute number one reading decks. So that again is the Textured Tarot. So the next category is, do I have a deck created by different artists? And I do have decks created by different artists, but not in the sense of like one of the 78 tarot decks or like the Ostara Tarot. I don't have any decks that are collab decks, but I do have decks created by multiple artists in that they're based on existing artwork that is by multiple artists, but that artwork all tends to follow a cohesive theme. I have never been very attracted to collab decks because I need visual consistency when I'm looking at a tarot spread. Like I really need that sort of sense of visual consistency within the artwork. But I do really like decks that are actually based on existing artwork. So one example of that is the Majestic Earth Tarot. This is a really recent example of that. And I've been absolutely loving this deck. This deck kicked my ass so hard the other day, like I can't even express it to you how hard it kicked my ass. It is a really great deck. It actually reads incredibly well for me. Oops, I should show the backs. And I think this one is really special. It is all these landscape paintings. It's, again, by all different artists. A lot of them are like Hudson River School artists, for example. And it's really beautiful. And I remember when I ordered this, I was super excited about it because the creator is Hilde Hinkel, who created the Tarot of Delphi. And I was really excited to get one of her decks in, but I wasn't sure how this like landscape style was going to read. It reads so well. And like I said, literally just like day before yesterday, this deck kicked my ass. It has given me some really amazing, on point, really communicative readings, and I'm really loving this one. So again, that's the Majestic Earth Tarot by Hilde Hinkel. So the next category is, do I have a deck without keywords, numbers, or symbols? And I do. It's actually something that I got quite recently that I haven't worked with really at all yet, and that is the Soul Cards 1 and 2. So I actually put them together in a big deck, and I'm really looking forward to working with these. So again, these cards are just images. They don't have any keywords. They don't have any numbers. They don't have any symbols. They don't come with a book that tells you anything about how to interpret the specific cards. This is a purely intuitive deck. It wasn't something that I was super sure about how well I would be able to work with it. So I got it as basically kind of an experiment to see how well I could work with it. And so we'll see how this goes. Because this is something that's quite new to me. And I think I've mentioned before, I don't work with a ton of Oracle, in my practice, but I was just really interested to see how it would work to read with this deck in a really purely intuitive way. And I sometimes have a hard time doing that. Like I sometimes have a hard time stepping completely away from, the left side of my brain. And so this was really something that I got as almost just kind of like a personal growth kind of task and experiment to see how I would read with these. So I'm really looking forward to working with them, but I literally just got them like last week, so I haven't done much work with them yet. So anyway, that is the Soul Cards 1 and 2. So the next category is, do I have a deck with different shades of blue on the box? And I have several, but the one I really thought about that instantly came to mind was the Prisma Visions Tarot. As you can see, this has a lot of shades of blue on the box. And this is a deck, I don't talk about this deck very often, but I actually do love this deck. And this is a deck that, here, I should show you the backs. Those are what the backs look like. I don't know if you guys have this thing that happens to you, but I have this thing that happens to me sometimes where a deck will remind me so strongly of a particular person in my life that I will literally get that deck just because I feel like I want it to read for that person. And this was one of those examples. Like I just have a particular friend that this deck reminds me of. The Fountain Tarot was actually also kind of like that, but the Fountain Tarot has actually become like a really big reader for me for lots of different people. But I did initially buy it because it specifically reminded me of one of my friends. And this one is kind of similar. And I love the artwork of this deck. Again, it has a slightly different take on a lot of cards than a lot of other decks do. It's not strictly a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, and I really particularly appreciate the take that it has. I really like the colors of this deck. It's so bright and vibrant and beautiful, and I know a lot of people find the cards really busy in this deck. I don't. It feels like a Van Gogh painting to me, this deck, and it has that sort of post-impressionist feel to it, and I really love it. And there are a couple of cards, the Magician in this deck, and the Hermit in this deck is amazing. It's one of my favorite Hermit cards of all time. It's really wonderful. It's very different from a lot of other decks, and I think it's a really cool one. Like I said, I really just bought it because I was like, oh, that reminds me of this person. And yeah, so that's why I got it, but I really like it. The next category is, do I have a children's deck? I don't have a deck made specifically for children. I have several decks that are potentially appropriate for children. The Little Monsters Tarot, which I already showed, is one example of that. Another deck that I think is a great children's deck is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot by Pamela Chen. So I've talked about this deck a lot before, and it's a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, but it's sweet and gentle and pastel and candy colored and full of unicorns with crystals on their butts, and I just love it. I think it's so sweet, and would be a great deck to read for kids. So that is one really good one. Another deck that I think is a great deck to read for kids, and that I actually have used to read for kids, specifically my niece and nephew, is the Forest of Enchantment Tarot. And this is such a wonderful deck. This deck has a really specific feel to it where it feels like you're living in a fairy tale. And I think that makes it so that it's really easy to communicate to kids about what's going on in these cards. Like every card, you're sort of like, I know exactly what is going on here. Like I know what kind of person this is. I know what kind of story this is. And you know, all of the imagery is really child appropriate. And so I think this is a really great deck to read for kids. And I did over Christmas do some readings for my niece and nephew with this deck, and really just sort of like affirmation kinds of readings. And this deck really worked really well for that. And I think that they connected to the imagery. It has that sort of storybook feel to it. And I think it's very easy for them to recognize and relate to the situations that are portrayed in all the cards. So I think this is a great deck to read for kids, great deck for adults, great deck for anybody. I freaking love this deck. Like I've talked about this already a couple times, but the Forest of Enchantment just rocked my socks last year when it came out. I love it so much. The next question is, do I have a duplicate deck and why? And the answer to that is yes. I have duplicates. I actually have more than one duplicate. I have 2 backup copies of the Touchstone Tarot, which is what I always refer to as my soul deck. It's my #1 deck. I love it so much, and it's out of print. So I do have extra copies of this deck. I am super excited that this deck is actually going to be coming back into print. US Games is putting out a new edition of this deck as mass market deck. So I might be able to give up my extra indie copies. We'll have to see how the mass market edition turns out. And if that's the case, then I might end up selling on my indie copies, but I know it's terrible. I know I'm like a hoarder for this deck, but I love it so much. I would be utterly heartbroken if anything ever happened to this deck. And so I literally have more than one backup copy like a crazy person. So anyway, this deck is my life partner. I love it so much. It is just one of my favorite, most kind, but also ass-kicking decks to read with. And it's just super special to me. I really, really love it. And I would have a very difficult time living without it. If my house were on fire and I could grab one deck, this is the one I'd grab. So that is the Touchstone Tarot, a deck that I do have duplicates of. The next category is, do I have a deck that is only about the physical body? And the answer to that is no. And in fact, I'm like trying to think of an example of a deck that is only about the physical body. I don't actually know if I quite know what that would look like. So I'm going to need to watch some other people's responses to this tag and see what they might have said in answer to that particular prompt, because I can't think of a deck off the top of my head that is about only the physical body. So yeah, that's kind of an odd one. I don't quite know how to answer that one, but I couldn't think of any decks in my own collection that seemed to fit that category. The next category, do I have a deck that's out of print and rare to find? So one example of that, again, I already talked about the Touchstone Tarot. This deck is out of print. That is why I have duplicate copies of this deck. Another deck that I have that is out of print and quite difficult to find these days is the Tildwick Tarot. This is by a creator who has passed away. His name was Neil Lovell, and it's one of my absolute most treasured possessions. I truly, truly love this deck. It's incredibly special, and it is quite hard to find, and I really treasure my copy. It's very special, and it is good for particular kinds of readings. I really only use this one for myself, and it is a really special one. It's one of those decks where I think there are a lot of people who might look at this deck and say, okay, well, this is like all interiors. There aren't any people in the cards. There aren't any animals in the cards. Like there's some animals in a few of the cards, but not most of them. And is this the kind of thing that I could really read with? And, you know, to me, it really is surprisingly readable. And it depends on what kind of reader you are. And if you are the kind of reader who likes to sort of journey into a place or feel like you're traveling or doing path work or kind of wanting to go into a card, this is kind of the ultimate deck in doing that. I really, really love that about it. So the final category in this do I have a deck tag is, do I have a deck with only food on the cards? And my initial thought was, no, I absolutely don't. But when I watched Julie Peekaboo Rose's answer to this tag, she pointed out that her own deck, which is the Cup of Contemplation cards, which I own and love, only have like cups of like hot drinks on the cards, like tea or coffee or hot chocolate or whatever you want to imagine as being in these cups. And I think that totally counts as a deck with only food on the cards. So this one is 100% my only deck that I think has only food on the cards. And I absolutely love this one. And since Julie came out with it, I've been enjoying it immensely. It's not one where I draw cards like every day. I've been just kind of like drawing a card, and I have a spot on my desk where I leave it propped up, and it's just something that I look at and think about and consider over the course of several days, the answer to that question. So this is a really fun deck, and Julie did such a beautiful job with it, and I'm just really loving it. And this totally counts, I think, as a deck that only has food. So, I mean, drink, but it counts. Anyway, so that's the Cup of Contemplation cards by Julie Rose or Peekaboo Rose on TarotTube. And so those are my answers to the Do I Have a Deck tag with lots of different decks in multiple different categories. This was really fun to do. I'd love to see other folks do this tag. If you do an answer to it, or you just want to chat down below in the comments about whether you have decks that fit these categories, I'd love to hear about it. And thank you all so much for watching. Have a great one. Bye-bye.